everybody, it's Dana, and I wanted to chat today a little bit about the common mistakes that I see when people are trying to make homemade food. I'm we're even going to talk about doing homemade toppers because some of you are making some mistakes there as well. So, when I see people making homemade foods in a lot of these groups, there's a couple of things going on. I often see boiled chicken, no skin, carrots, peas, and rice, or maybe potatoes. That is a very heavy carbohydrate diet. Boiled anything basically takes away the nutrient value of those foods. It's like overcooking the kibble. So you want to be in the category of raw or very gently cooked. And that means like a light saute, just a gentle take the edge off of the refrigeration and being cold or uncooked food, right? So very gentle cook. Our dogs need fat. So I get that you don't want to cook skin of chicken and you don't want to render that fat. You don't want to render any fat. So if you've got like 80-20 hamburger or something along those lines and you cook that and you render out the fat while you cook it, you can't use that fat. And remember, the more you cook something, the higher the heat, the more damage we do to the ingredients and the nutrients of those proteins. But we do need a fat source in our diet, right? And if you are using lean proteins or cooked meats, then you need to add it back in the source of something like an avocado oil, a grapeseed oil, a sunflower oil, things of that nature, or maybe ghee and tallow, grass-fed butter, anything that puts that fat back into the diet. We typically want a recipe to be around, 12 to 15% fat. Some diets will go significantly higher for some dogs, for our athletes, for cancer dogs. We may go much higher on the fat percentage, but you don't want to do that if your dog is prone to pancreatitis or has chronic pancreatitis. You want to manage those fats. So it's important to not be fat-free, but to get that source right. I also see people missing organ meat. It's a big deal. We need about 10% of a recipe to include organ meat. That's 5% from some organ like kidney, pancreas, tripe, things of that nature, and another 5% organ meat from a liver source. Very nutrient rich, very vitamin heavy, right? We get a lot of vitamins from organ meat. If you don't want to cook it into your crock pot recipe or your homemade recipe, then you need to add it in the form of glandulars. And you can do that with products like 4-Leaf Rover, Guts and Glory it's called, or things like the Volhard Endurance includes chicken liver in it. And Dr. Ruth's Total Body Support currently has pork and beef liver. And I think she's going to change that to be pork liver only. Or at least to have an option that doesn't have it in there. But you need glandulars, organ meats, in your dog's recipe. I also see people missing omega-3 especially. Many of you are adding in an omega-369, and basically that's not as helpful as you might think it is. There are ratios of omega-3 to omega-6 and to the omega-9. For many of our dogs who have inflammatory conditions, we want to change that ratio to be higher in omega-3. We want to add more omega-3. Well, when you add an omega-3, 6, 9, you're not shifting that ratio, right? You are actually continuing to add in more inflammatory properties. Omega-6 is high in inflammatories, right? It's in chicken and a lot of other foods, but we tend to get more omega-6 than we need and not enough omega-3 in most recipes. So if you have a dog that has allergies, arthritis, anxiety, cancer, we need to bump those amounts up, some more than others, and you need to do that slowly as well. But the point is, most of you are missing your omega-3. You're not feeding fish, and we're missing that, or we're adding in the wrong product to change that ratio. It's a very important thing. Many of you are missing a good vitamin mineral supplement because the food isn't balanced in and of itself. You need to add a good whole food vitamin mineral supplement to make sure we're rounding out all of those nutrients. Okay. The other thing that I see is people get in a rut, right? We tend to make the same recipe over and over and over again. And what I also want you to recognize is that when you find a recipe out on the internet and somebody's crafted this recipe, you need to decide whether it was balanced or not, right? And is it flexible? So a lot of times what I see when you get down to these recipes that have 20 different ingredients in them, like you'll see a little piece of fish on there, and you'll see a little oyster, and you'll see an egg, and you'll see all these things that make the bowl beautiful. They are there to make the bowl balanced. It's really hard to balance per bowl. But if you think about balancing over the course of a week, then you can do that. But the problem with some of these really beautiful bowls, and they've got 2 oysters and an anchovy and a quail egg and all of this stuff built into the bowl, the minute you change that recipe, the minute you try to create a variance, you're potentially out of balance again. Because they've done some macro analysis of the vitamins and minerals for that specific recipe. So if it called for lamb, for example, and you changed to chicken, then you've changed the makeup of that recipe, and it might not be fully balanced. Okay? So that's an important deal. The other thing that I see people missing often is calcium and kelp or iodine. When we do start adding it, many of you get the amounts wrong, especially on the iodine side, and we don't want to go too heavy. But for calcium, if you're feeding a homemade meal, then you either need to supplement the calcium in your batch of recipe. It's really hard to do per bowl. Or give your dog a raw meaty bone a couple of times a week. But you've got to have that calcium source. And unfortunately, chicken, rice, carrots, and peas doesn't make that happen. It misses way too many things. Okay? Iodine needs to be in the diet. And so I use Now brand kelp in a powder form, and it makes it much easier to measure how much we're doing. So I do encourage you, if you're making homemade food, unless you're doing these really custom bowls, which honestly I don't do. I just don't. I'm not ever going to go to that level of detail. But make a batch of food where you can do the calculations a little more easily. Other things that could be missing, sodium. Most people don't put sodium in, or they put way too much. And we need to understand how to get that right for the amount of food that you're making. So, what else? Let's see. Oh, And then again, these recipe ruts, I call them recipe ruts, right? So you get into a situation where you've created some your dog likes and you feed it over and over and over and over and over and over again. The problem that you may run into is that that could create an intolerance, meaning the system gets sort of fed up with the fact that it's only getting certain things repeatedly, and it starts to say, I can't process that anymore. I can't deal with that level of nutrition or the deficit or the overage or the whatever of this particular item anymore. And we start to see intolerances in our animals. When we vary things, when we rotate and ebb and flow between proteins and vegetables and things of that nature, then the body's like, woohoo, I know what to do with these things. It gives me some variety. It gives me some function and support in varied ways. And so that becomes really important. Herbs, they make a lot of great benefit into the diet, and custom herb choices can help with certain conditions and ailments and issues that your dog may be having. So I love that many of you are trying to make homemade food. What I don't want you to do is make homemade food that does not meet your dog's nutritional needs. There's a big difference in feeding them today and making that bowl good, right? Taste good, feel good, enjoyable today, and how those nutritional components play out over time, over longevity, and what the body does when it starts missing key, important nutrients. And when those nutrients are missing and we start to see an ailment become present, can we recover from that? Food's our first choice, but can we get back on the positive side of things if we have been deficient in these categories for so long? So I'm going to put a link to a blog that I have in here about the common mistakes that I see and these topics of things that are often missing. And I need you to think about, where are they coming from to be in your dog's diet? Are you including those ingredients through whole foods? Are you including some sort of supplement? Are your supplements from whole foods, or are your supplements synthetic? Right? We talked about this a lot too. But that's going to be another conversation, right? So making bowls of food, balance over the week, but make sure you have all the right ingredients. Your protein should be about 50% of your bowl, maybe more. Your fat should be around 15% of your total calories. And then limit your carbs, significantly limit your carbs. Get the rice out of there. It offers no nutritional value. If you are looking to add something that is more filling, maybe supportive to the budget, then look at something like oats or quinoa instead of rice and potatoes. Find your fat source, omega-3s, vitamin minerals from whole food sources, and if you can't put them in the bowl, then you need a supplement that does that. Rotate into fish days. Where is your calcium coming from? Where is your iodine coming from? Where is your sodium? And how much? How much of each of these things do you need relative to the amount of food you created in your batch? So that when you portion that batch out into bowls of food, bowls of food across the course of a week or two, is your dog getting the right nutrient in those portions? All of this is really, really important. So if you need a recipe review, I am happy to just walk through a good recipe review with you and give you some alternatives. If you need supplementation choices, just ask me and I will point you to the products that I have selected as great quality and things that I am comfortable recommending to my clients and to all of you as good choices for these options. So stay tuned. I'll come back later and we'll talk about those of you who are still feeding kibble and how to maybe do toppers and or blend in some homemade ingredients.